The crystal chandeliers of Maison Azur cast a warm glow over the restaurant's elegant interior as Karoline Leavitt quietly entered through the side door. Dressed in simple jeans and a casual blazer after a long day of meetings, she looked nothing like what most would expect of the owner of Boston's most exclusive dining establishment. Tonight, she simply wanted to observe operations from a guest's perspective, something she did periodically but discreetly at her various hospitality ventures. "Table for one, please," she requested softly at the reception podium, where a new host she didn't recognize greeted her with a quick, dismissive glance. "Do you have a reservation?" he asked curtly, his eyes already scanning past her to the affluently dressed couple entering behind her. "No, but any available table would be fine," Karoline replied pleasantly. What happened in the next 15 minutes would leave the entire restaurant staff in shock. The new waiter assigned to Karoline's corner table made a catastrophic mistake. One that would transform an ordinary evening into a moment that the entire staff would never forget. His condescending remarks to the casually dressed woman he assumed was out of place in such an exclusive setting would lead to consequences no one could have anticipated. Before we continue with this incredible story of mistaken identity and humbling consequences, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories about powerful women who command respect in today's business world. Now let's return to Maison Azur, where Karoline Leavitt was about to experience her own restaurant from a surprisingly different perspective. Maison Azur stood as the crown jewel of Boston's high-end dining scene, with its deep blue velvet, chairs, hand-painted ceilings, and panoramic views of the Charles River. The restaurant had become the go-to destination for the city's elite since its opening just 18 months earlier. Securing a reservation typically required booking weeks in advance, and the restaurant's strict dress code was legendary among Boston socialites. What few of the regular patrons knew, however, was that the mastermind behind this celebrated establishment was the unassuming 27-year-old Karoline Leavitt. A graduate of Harvard Business School with a background in hospitality management, Karoline had built a remarkable reputation in the industry, owning not just Maison Azur, but 4 other successful restaurants across New England. Despite her growing empire, Karoline maintained a low profile. She rarely appeared in press photos, declined most interview requests, and preferred to let her establishments speak for themselves. This approach had served her well, allowing her to move freely through her own venues without the constant recognition that might interfere with her ability to assess operations honestly. Frank Weber, the general manager who had been with Karoline since her first restaurant venture, was away tonight attending his daughter's college graduation. In his absence, assistant manager Derek Willard was overseeing the evening service, his first time running the floor without Frank's supervision. Derek, eager to impress, had been particularly stringent about enforcing the restaurant's policies. The newest addition to the staff was Thomas Pelletier, a waiter with an impressive resume from several Michelin-starred restaurants in New York. His technical skills were impeccable, but Frank had expressed some concerns about his attitude toward certain guests. "Remember, Thomas, true luxury is in how we make people feel, not just in what we serve them," Frank had cautioned during training. Tonight would put that wisdom to the test. Karoline was seated at table 17. A small corner table partially obscured by a decorative column, perfect for her observational purposes, but considered one of the less desirable locations in the restaurant. The host who had seated her, Brandon, had noted her casual attire with a slight frown, but had said nothing. The restaurant wasn't fully booked tonight, allowing some flexibility with the usual dress code enforcement. As she settled into her seat, Karoline observed the flow of service throughout the dining room. She noticed small details: water glasses unfilled at table 9, a slightly delayed appetizer delivery to table 23, the genuine warmth with which longtime server Marissa greeted regular guests at table 5. These observations were precisely why Karoline valued these anonymous visits. Thomas approached her table with the practiced glide of an experienced server. But Karoline immediately detected a subtle shift in his demeanor as he took in her casual appearance. His smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Good evening," he said, his tone noticeably cooler than what she had observed in his interactions with other guests. "Can I get you something to drink while you look over the menu?" "The Chateau Margaux 2010, please," Karoline replied, naming one of the most expensive wines on the menu, a selection she had personally added to the wine list last month. A flicker of surprise crossed Thomas's face, quickly replaced by a look that bordered on condescension. "That's a 950 bottle, madam," he stated pointedly. "Perhaps I could suggest something more appropriate? We have some lovely house wines by the glass starting at $18. Karoline maintained her composure, though she noted the assumption underlying his suggestion. "The Margaux will be fine, thank you. Just a glass for now." Thomas hesitated, seemingly uncertain whether to take the order seriously. "Of course," he finally replied with a thin smile. "I'll need to see a credit card for the order." This request violated Maison Azure's policy for guests dining in. Credit cards were only required for bottle service at the bar, not for by-the-glass orders at tables. Karoline knew this policy intimately, having written it herself, but she was curious to see how far this interaction would go. "Is that a new policy?" she asked mildly. "For certain orders, yes," Thomas responded vaguely, his implication clear in his tone. Karoline silently placed her Black American Express Centurion card on the table. Thomas's eyes widened slightly at the rare card, but he quickly recovered his composure, picking it up with a slightly more respectful nod before departing. As she watched him walk away, Karoline noticed Derek observing the interaction from across the room. The assistant manager's furrowed brow suggested he recognized something was amiss, but he made no move to intervene. What neither Thomas nor Derek realized was that this seemingly routine interaction with a casually dressed patron was about to escalate into a situation that would fundamentally change Maison Azure's service approach and become a powerful lesson in hospitality that none of them would ever forget. When Thomas returned with her wine, his demeanor had subtly shifted. The Black Centurion card had clearly made an impression, but rather than correcting his approach, he seemed to have developed a new theory about Karoline. Perhaps she was the pampered relative of someone wealthy, but clearly didn't belong in such a refined establishment herself. "Your Chateau Margaux, madame," he announced, pouring a modest tasting portion with practiced precision. His technique was flawless, but the warmth that should accompany such service was noticeably absent. Karoline sampled the wine with the expertise of someone who had spent years developing her palate. "Perfect, thank you," she said appreciatively. The wine was indeed excellent. She had personally selected this vintage during her visit to Bordeaux the previous year. "Will you be dining alone this evening?" Thomas asked, his tone carrying a hint of pity that Karoline immediately detected. "Yes, just me tonight." "I see." He handed her the menu. "Let me walk you through some of our more straightforward options. The chicken is quite accessible." Karoline noted his deliberate avoidance of recommending the chef's specialties or the evening's tasting menu, standard offerings he had enthusiastically presented to other tables she'd been observing. "Actually, I'd like to try Chef Laurent's new tasting menu," she requested. "I've heard his reinterpretation of classical French techniques is remarkable." Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly. "The tasting menu is quite extensive, 7 courses with wine pairings. It's a significant commitment, at $3 per person." "That sounds perfect," Karoline replied evenly. Thomas seemed about to say something else, but apparently thought better of it. "As you wish. I should mention the tasting menu typically requires advance notice, but I'll speak with the kitchen." As I hide, he walked away. Karoline noticed him stop at the service station and engage in a hushed conversation with Derek. Both men glanced in her direction several times. Derek's expression grew increasingly concerned, though it wasn't clear whether his worry stemmed from Thomas's treatment of a guest or from the kitchen's ability to accommodate the last-minute tasting menu request. From her corner table, Karoline continued her careful observation of the restaurant's operations. She noticed the sommelier, Marcus, whom she had personally hired from a renowned Boston hotel, providing warmly informative wine service to a group of obviously wealthy diners. His animated descriptions and genuine enthusiasm were exactly what she valued in her staff. The contrast with Thomas's perfunctory service to her was striking. When Thomas returned, he informed her that the kitchen would accommodate her request for the tasting menu. Chef Laurent has agreed to prepare it for you, though he wants me to advise you that substitutions aren't possible. Please thank him for me. I'm looking forward to experiencing his full vision, Karoline responded. As the first course arrived, a delicate amuse-bouche featuring caviar and gold leaf, Thomas seemed to struggle with reconciling his initial assessment of Karoline with her evident familiarity with fine dining. His solution appeared to be a new approach, explaining each dish in excruciatingly simplistic terms. "This is caviar, fish eggs, from the Caspian Sea," he began, speaking slowly as if to a child or someone completely unfamiliar with gastronomy. "The gold on top is actual edible gold leaf. It's purely decorative and has no taste." Karoline nodded patiently. "Yes, I'm familiar with beluga caviar. This presentation is beautiful." Thomas seemed momentarily thrown by her knowledge but quickly recovered. "The chef recommends taking a small amount on the mother-of-pearl spoon. That's made from a shell, not metal, because metal would affect the taste." "Thank you for the guidance," Karoline replied, keeping her expression neutral despite the unnecessarily condescending explanation. Throughout the next 3 courses, Thomas continued his pattern of over-explaining basic culinary concepts while maintaining a subtly dismissive tone. When Karoline asked about the inspiration behind a particular dish, he responded with a patronizing, "It's a very complex technique that would be difficult to explain to someone without a culinary background." What Thomas didn't know was that Karoline had studied culinary arts before business school and had worked alongside Chef Laurent for 3 months, developing the concept for Maison Azur. The situation escalated when a well-known local politician and regular patron, Senator Williams, entered the restaurant with his wife. Despite lacking a reservation, they were immediately given a prime table by the window. Thomas, who had been providing increasingly inattentive service to Karoline, rushed to greet them effusively. For the next 20 minutes, Karoline's water glass remained empty, and her 4th course sat untouched on the service stand, while Thomas devoted his attention to the senator. Derek, who should have noticed the service gap, was occupied entertaining other VIP guests at the bar. When Thomas finally returned, he didn't acknowledge the delay. "Your 4th course, the poached halibut. It's a white fish," he added unnecessarily. "The sauce might be a bit complex for some palates. It's a beurre blanc, which is French for white butter." Karoline decided to probe a bit further. "The sauce has an interesting note I can't quite place. Is there perhaps a hint of kaffir lime?" Thomas smiled condescendingly. No. It's just lemon and butter. Chef Laurent's cooking is actually quite sophisticated. He uses techniques and flavors that many ordinary diners might not appreciate." Immediately. This statement was particularly ironic, given that Karoline had specifically suggested the kaffir lime addition to Chef Laurent when they were developing the menu, and it had indeed become a signature element of his beurre blanc. The meal progressed. 2 more incidents occurred that tested Karoline's patience. First, when she requested to speak with the sommelier about the wine pairing for the 5th course, Thomas dismissed the request with, "I can probably answer any questions you might have about the wine. It might be better not to disturb Marcus while he's attending to the senator's table." Then, when she mentioned a slight inconsistency in the temperature of the 6th course, Thomas responded, "The dish is meant to be served exactly as Chef prepared it. Perhaps it's just not what you're used to? Our regulars understand Chef Laurent's vision." By the time dessert arrived, The tension at the table was palpable. Thomas had shifted from condescension to thinly veiled impatience, clearly eager to return to what he perceived as more important guests. "And finally, your dessert, a chocolate souffle with gold leaf and a coffee crème anglaise," he announced, setting down the perfectly risen creation with mechanical precision. "The kitchen would appreciate your feedback on this particular dish, as it's a new addition to the menu." This was Karoline's opportunity. "Actually, I'm very familiar with this souffle. The recipe is my grandmother's. I gave it to Chef Laurent myself when we opened Maison Azur 18 months ago." Thomas froze, confusion crossing his features. "I'm sorry. You gave the recipe to Chef Laurent?" Karoline smiled and extended her hand. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Karoline Leavitt, the owner of Maison Azur." The color drained from Thomas's face as the realization of who he had been serving and how he had been serving her dawned on him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words emerged. "Perhaps we could speak privately for a moment," Karoline suggested calmly, rising from her chair. "And maybe ask Derek to join us as well." Thomas nodded numbly, looking as though he might be physically ill. As they moved toward the small private dining room off the main floor, Derek noticed the interaction and approached quickly, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "Is everything all right?" he asked, looking between Thomas and Karoline. "Derek, this is—" Thomas began, his voice strained. "Ms. Leavitt," Derek finished, recognition and shock washing over his features. We weren't expecting you tonight." "That was rather the point," Karoline replied evenly. "Let's continue this conversation privately." Once inside the small private dining room with the door closed behind them, Thomas immediately began a stream of desperate apologies. "Ms. Leavitt, I can't begin to express how sorry I am. If I had known who you were—" Karoline raised her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "That's precisely the problem, Thomas. Your treatment of me shouldn't have hinged on knowing my identity." She turned to address both men. "I created Maison Azur with a specific vision, to deliver exceptional cuisine in an atmosphere of genuine hospitality. What I experienced tonight, as a guest, fell significantly short of that standard." Derek, visibly distressed, interjected, "Ms. Leavitt, I take full responsibility. I should have been monitoring service more closely, especially with Frank away tonight." "Yes, you should have," Karoline agreed frankly. "But this goes beyond supervision. This is about the fundamental principles of hospitality." She turned back to Thomas. "You made a series of assumptions about me based solely on my appearance. You decided within moments that I didn't belong here, that I couldn't possibly understand fine cuisine, that I wasn't worthy of the same service you provided to guests you deemed more important." Thomas stared at the floor, unable to meet her gaze. "What's most concerning," Karoline continued, "is that you seem to believe luxury service means condescension toward those you perceive as outsiders, while fawning over those you identify as influential. That's not what Maison Azur represents." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "True luxury hospitality isn't about creating exclusivity through intimidation or discomfort. It's about making every guest feel valued, respected, and welcomed into an exceptional experience." Derek cleared his throat nervously. "Will Thomas be— do you want us to— Am I firing you, Thomas?" Karoline filled in the unasked question directly. "No, I'm not." Both men looked up in surprise. "That would be the easy solution, wouldn't it?" Karoline continued. "But it wouldn't address the deeper issue. Instead, I have a different approach in mind." She took a seat at the small table, gesturing for them to join her. As they sat, the power dynamic in the room shifted visibly. This was no longer an owner reprimanding employees, but a leader engaging her team in solving a problem. "For the next month, Thomas, you'll be working closely with Frank on a specific project. We're going to revamp our service training program And your experience tonight will form the foundation of that effort. Thomas looked confused. I don't understand. You're going to help us create a better approach to hospitality by analyzing exactly what went wrong in your interaction with me. You'll document each assumption you made, each service standard you applied differently based on your perception of the guest, and each moment where genuine hospitality was replaced by performance or prejudice. She turned to Derek. And you'll join this project as well, focusing specifically on how management can better monitor and maintain service standards consistently for all guests. Both men sat in stunned silence. Additionally, Karoline continued, both of you will spend one night dining at each of our 5 restaurants as anonymous guests. You'll make reservations under different names, dress casually, and experience our service from the other side. You'll document your observations and feelings throughout each experience. Derek nodded slowly, beginning to understand the approach. You want us to experience what you experienced tonight? Exactly, Karoline confirmed. True empathy comes from lived experience, not theoretical training. She leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. I believe in second chances because I believe people can learn and grow when given the opportunity. But I also believe in accountability. You'll have 4 weeks to demonstrate that you truly understand what went wrong tonight and how to ensure it never happens again, not just with me, but with any guest who walks through our doors. Thomas, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Why would you give me this chance? What I did tonight, the way I treated you, it was unforgivable. Not unforgivable, Karoline corrected. Just deeply misguided. You have excellent technical skills, Thomas. Your knowledge of cuisine and service mechanics is impressive. What you're missing is the heart of hospitality, and that's something that can be developed if you're willing to do the work. She stood, signaling that the conversation was drawing to a close. Frank will be back tomorrow. I'll brief him on the situation and your new project. In the meantime, I'd like both of you to return to the floor and continue service as usual. We can discuss this further in our staff meeting tomorrow morning. As they prepared to leave the private dining room, Karoline added one final thought. Remember this feeling, the shock, the embarrassment, the uncertainty you're experiencing right now. Many guests feel a version of this when they're treated as outsiders in luxury spaces. Your job is to ensure no one ever feels that way at Maison Azur again. With those words, she opened the door, allowing them to exit first. As they walked back into the main dining room, the atmosphere had noticeably shifted. Word had somehow spread among the staff that the owner was present, and every employee was now performing their duties with heightened awareness and precision. Karoline returned to her table to finish her dessert, while Thomas and Derek resumed their duties with visible discomfort, but renewed commitment. The evening service continued, but something fundamental had changed in the restaurant's atmosphere. A palpable reminder that hospitality, at its core, is about making others feel valued, regardless of who they appear to be. The morning after, Karoline's revelatory dinner at Maison Azur. The entire service staff assembled in the restaurant's private dining room for what had been announced as an urgent meeting. The room buzzed with nervous energy. Word of the previous night's events had spread quickly through the staff, though the details remained hazy for those who hadn't been present. Frank Weber, the general manager who had returned from his daughter's graduation, stood at the front of the room beside Karoline. His normally jovial expression was serious as he surveyed the assembled team. By now, most of you have heard something about what happened last night, Frank began. Rather than allow rumors to continue, Ms. Leavitt wanted to address the situation directly with all of you. Karoline stepped forward, her presence commanding despite her unassuming appearance. Thank you for coming in early today. What happened last night was unfortunate, but it presents us with a valuable opportunity to re-examine our understanding of what luxury hospitality truly means. She briefly recounted her experience the previous evening, careful not to single out Thomas by name, though most of the staff could guess who had been involved. She emphasized that the issue wasn't personal but systemic, a subtle culture that had developed where the quality of service had become tied to perceptions about a guest's status or importance. The true test of hospitality isn't how we treat celebrities or wealthy regulars, Karoline explained. It's how we treat every person who walks through our doors, regardless of what they're wearing, how they speak, or whether we recognize their name. She then unveiled what would become known as the Azure Standard, a new approach to service that would be implemented across all 5 of her restaurants. The core of this new standard was simple but profound. Service should be consistent, genuine and free from assumptions about who belongs in a luxury setting. Starting today, we're eliminating any policies that create artificial barriers, she announced. Our dress code will be adjusted to be more inclusive. We'll no longer require different credit card authorizations based on subjective assessments of guests. And most importantly, we'll implement a new training program focused on recognizing and eliminating unconscious bias in service. The staff listened attentively as Karoline outlined the changes, many nodding in agreement. Even those who hadn't been directly involved in the previous night's incident could recognize moments when they had made similar judgments about guests based on appearances. Thomas, who had been standing quietly at the back of the room, stepped forward when Karoline invited comments and questions. His face was drawn from what had clearly been a sleepless night, but his voice was steady. "I want to apologize to everyone," he began. "What happened last night wasn't just a mistake I made. Individually, it reflected poorly on all of us and on the restaurant Ms. Leavitt has worked so hard to build. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be part of making things right." He turned to address Karoline directly. "The way I treated you was inexcusable. I made assumptions that were not only wrong but completely contrary to what true hospitality should. I want you all to know that I'm committed to the project Ms. Leavitt has assigned, and I hope what I learn can help ensure nothing like this happens again." His candor seemed to break the tension in the room. Several other staff members began sharing their own reflections on times they had made similar judgments or provided different levels of service based on appearances. Marisa, the longtime server Karoline had observed providing warm, genuine service, the previous evening offered an insight that resonated with everyone. Luxury isn't about making some people feel special by making others feel small. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels valued. As the meeting concluded, Karoline announced one additional initiative. Each month, every staff member would experience a meal as a guest at one of their restaurants, dressed casually and without revealing their connection to the establishment. These experiences would form the basis for ongoing discussions about service improvements. "We're not just in the business of serving excellent food," Karoline reminded them as they prepared to open for lunch service. "We're in the business of creating experiences that make people feel respected and valued. That's the true luxury we offer." Over the following months, the transformation at Maison Azur and Karoline's other restaurants was remarkable. The Azure Standard became the cornerstone of their approach to hospitality, and stories of the inclusive, genuine service at her establishments began to spread throughout Boston's dining scene. Thomas, somewhat surprisingly, became one of the most passionate advocates for the new approach. The project he had initially viewed as punishment evolved into a mission. Working closely with Frank, he developed training scenarios based on his experience and helped other staff recognize their own unconscious biases. 6 months after the incident, Boston Magazine ran a feature story titled "Redefining Luxury: How Karoline Leavitt is Transforming Fine Dining." The article detailed the Azure Standard and its impact on guest experiences, highlighting the unusual story of its origin, though Karoline had requested that Thomas remain anonymous in the retelling. The most meaningful outcome, however, came in the form of a handwritten note Karoline received from an elderly woman who had dined at Maison Azur with her granddaughter to celebrate the young woman's college graduation. "For years, I've avoided fine dining establishments because I never felt welcome in them. Last night at your restaurant was different. Your staff made us feel like we belonged, never once making me feel that my simple dress or unfamiliarity with some dishes was a problem. Thank you for creating a place where luxury means kindness, not exclusivity. 1 year after the pivotal night when a waiter had insulted the owner without recognizing her, Maison Azur hosted a special dinner celebrating the first anniversary of the Azur standard. The event brought together staff from all 5 restaurants, industry leaders, and regular guests from all walks of life. As Karoline addressed the gathered crowd, she reflected on the lesson that had transformed her business. True luxury isn't defined by who we keep out, but by how we welcome everyone in. It isn't measured in prices or exclusivity, but in how we make people feel. And most importantly, it isn't about recognizing importance in others, but about acknowledging the inherent dignity in everyone who crosses our threshold. Thomas, now promoted to service trainer for all 5 restaurants, stood among his colleagues with a newfound sense of purpose. His greatest professional error had become the catalyst for his most significant growth, and for a movement that was gradually changing perceptions of luxury hospitality throughout the industry. As for Karoline Leavitt, her restaurants continued to thrive, not despite their more inclusive approach, but because of it. The waiting list for reservations grew longer as word spread about establishments where exceptional cuisine was matched by genuinely welcoming service. The incident that might have ended with a simple firing had instead sparked a revolution in hospitality. All because Karoline had recognized that the most powerful response to disrespect isn't punishment, but education, and that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from our most uncomfortable moments. If you enjoyed this story about leadership and transformation, please like and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content about business leaders who are redefining success through compassion and innovation. Share your thoughts in the comments below about times when being underestimated led to unexpected positive changes in your life or career.